Okay, welcome everyone to the Duke Center for Misophonia and Emotion Regulation webinar series. This is our spring 2024 webinar. We're delighted that you're all here and taking the time to be with us. And if you're watching this on YouTube later, thank you for taking the time whenever this is to watch this. I'm Zach Rosenthal. I lead the Duke Center for Misophonia and Emotion Regulation. And I'm just delighted today that we have a very special guest in Dr. Jamie Ward from the University of Sussex, who's going to talk with us today about some really exciting work he's doing, misophonia from sensory sensitivity to clinical vulnerability. This work, as you'll see, is quite cutting edge and interesting in that it takes really complicated ways of understanding misophonia and simplifies them. With misophonia being a complicated disorder, this work that Dr. Ward is doing, to me, is really invaluable. So I'm going to, before we begin the presentation, I'm just going to orient you all briefly to what we're going to do. And I just have a few kind of opening remarks. The first is really a welcome from all of us. We've been doing these webinars now for 7 years on a quarterly basis, and we at Duke are really interested in supporting the research that people around the world are doing and giving them a chance to have it have impact in a way that anybody can understand and be inspired by. Our team can be reached to learn more about what we do at misophonia.duke.edu. Our YouTube channel, if you're curious about watching videos, is the @DukeCMER YouTube. And if you're an Instagram person, please follow us if you're interested at Duke Center for Misophonia. If you have questions directly for me, feel free anytime, anybody to reach out directly to me. I'm not the greatest at responding instantly, but I will get back to you. We are a large team here at Duke and our center, and I just want to pause here for a second and overwhelm you with a lot of faces to say this is our current group as of today, and we're really thrilled that we continue to grow and are doing research, clinical work, and education and advocacy related to misophonia. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank Dr. Jennifer Brout and Cris Edwards, both of whom are here today to help with the moderation and facilitation of the webinar. And if you're in the misosphere, as Cris calls it, you know who these two leaders are. They are giants in this area and do tremendous work to lead all of us in advocacy and education with a backbone in science. So thank you to Cris and Jen for you being here. Also want to thank my team, specifically Emily and Lisa, who are here today as well to help with any of the needs that we have. I want to thank my whole team, and I especially want to thank our anonymous families who support our center. Literally, we wouldn't be here without their funding. We wouldn't be able to do anything we do at all without their generosity. And finally, thank you to the advocates, all of you who support research, education, and treatment of misophonia. In today's presentation, we're gonna turn it over in a few minutes to Dr. Ward. But before we do, I just also want to say some things about how we go about doing this. The first is that we will do everything we can to minimize any triggers on our part. We're very mindful of this. We'll be very careful. And if we inadvertently do say something, or if I'm pronouncing words or saying something in a way that, or if Dr. Ward does, that's triggering, we apologize in advance. We do our best to prevent this. The other thing to say is that this is recorded and will be placed on YouTube, as I said. So if you don't want your face or your name there on camera, you can use the Zoom feature to just show the black screen, and feel free to change your name if you like. When we get to the Q&A portion of today, we will stop the recording, and that part will not be uploaded to YouTube. Your questions. You will have questions throughout today's presentation. We encourage you very much to use the Zoom chat feature. Ask any question you like. We have a fleet of people here to answer those questions. So we will answer everything we can in the Zoom chat. You're free to talk with each other in the Zoom chat. And when we finish with the presentation, we will have time for a more traditional question and answer session, which Dr. Brout will moderate for us. A couple last bits here as we continue to see people trickle into today's presentation. A main thing I want to highlight is that we are soon going to have on April 30th, the second annual CARE Day, which is a day-long set of conversations about research for everyone with misophonia. Get it? C-A-R-E, CARE. I know it's super hokey, and I take the credit and blame for that kind of corny acronym, but that's what it is. It's conversations about research for everyone with misophonia. So parents, family members, loved ones, sufferers, clinicians, researchers, anybody, philanthropists, anybody who wants to come can come, and it's free. And it's all day long, and you can drop in, you can leave, you can come back. It's totally up to you. We're recording everything, and what we have is next slide. What we have is a series of presentations. You can see Dr. Ward will be one of the featured speakers, along with a number of other speakers presenting about their recent research in the last year. And the idea is that it's a very short research presentation designed really to be very kind of pragmatic and for any audience. So it's not, we should not have a lot of jargon. It shouldn't be very complicated. We want to deliver the science in a short way that's easy to understand, straight to the point, so that we can then have conversation with people about how the research might help them or their loved one, how to make sense of the research in an inspiring way, and sort of, what does it mean for the world of misophonia? Most research doesn't actually impact directly, and the design of this day is to get research to matter by helping it impact people directly. Okay, so that's that. So please join us at CARE Day. You will need to, I'll go back, you do need to register for the event at soquiet.org/care. You can also just go into Google or your search engine and type CARE Day 2024 Misophonia, and you will find the link. Please register. We are up to, Cris, what are we up to right now? How many people have registered?
We're at, I think, about 550-ish. I haven't checked this morning. Yeah,
okay.
A lot.
Last year we had roughly 800, and we want to see if we can beat that. We want to see if we can really spread the word so that awareness gets out there. And one way to measure that is how many people register. So please do register if you're not already there, and please share this information with anybody you think might be interested. Okay, today we just did number one, this welcome. I'm now going to introduce Dr. Ward. He's going to take it from there. And like I said, when we get to the end of his presentation, we'll do Q&A. So Dr. Ward is a colleague of mine. I really respect his work. I really just think he's doing amazing stuff. You can read here what he has online as his bio. Dr. Ward is the co-director of a doctoral scholarship program that I'm afraid I'm going to mispronounce, so I'm skipping over the name. Is it Leverhulme? Okay, thank you for being gracious, Jamie. He has been the lead for psychology, psychiatry, and neuroscience at Sussex since 2022. He is also president of the British Association for Cognitive Neuroscientists. Dr. Ward is a neuroscientist. He's been the editor of Cognitive Neuroscience and the director of Sussex Neuroscience Research Program from 2015 to 2022. So you've got a really smart neuroscience researcher here who's doing work that he's going to share today that isn't actually neuroscience, but is going to inform and is informed by neuroscience. So I'm going to stop sharing here, Jamie. If you want to take it away, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me today, Zach and colleagues. I really look forward to your questions and hopefully telling you something a little bit new. So today I'm going to talk about misophonia from sensory sensitivity to clinical vulnerability, and hopefully dig a little bit deeper behind what is misophonia. So obviously the people in this talk are going to know what misophonia is. A lot of people will be experiencing this or know someone who does. So this is just our word cloud, just asking a group of misophonics who've registered for research with us just to tell us what their worst sounds are. And hopefully this is familiar to many of you and it is kind of ringing bells for you. So this is what misophonia is, a strong aversion, intolerance to specific sounds. But what I'd like to go through today is that actually there's more to misophonia than this. Although that's how we define misophonia, it's caused by a wider set of other mechanisms. So people with misophonia often have lots of other ongoing issues. The technical term for these are comorbidities. It's not a term I particularly like. We could use co-occurrences or other things. But essentially, the negative reactions to specific sounds are just one feature of what it is to have misophonia. These comorbidities are seen as being something of a scientific problem, because if you've got somebody with misophonia who also has anxiety and also has something else, how can we really be sure that we're studying misophonia? Maybe we're studying anxiety, maybe we're studying one of the other things that we haven't thought to ask about. What I'd like to persuade you today is that actually these wider traits are part of the solution. It's not just a scientific problem. And it's part of the solution because it tells us something about the nature of misophonia. And what it tells us is that misophonia itself isn't something that comes neatly packaged. It comes out of the interaction of lots of other things that are co-occurring. So these co-occurring things, they're not just nuisance things, they're part of what it is that makes misophonia misophonia. One of those things that I think is a co-occurring trait, it's not something that is diagnosed in its own right, is sensory sensitivity. So finding not just sounds, but maybe certain visual stimuli, smells, and other things being particularly strong or aversive. This is one of the core elements of misophonia, even though it doesn't appear, for example, in this word cloud here. So here are just Googling comorbidities of misophonia. I was going to do a graph or something, but you get the gist. Don't dig into the percentages. People have used different methodologies here. Just look at the key headlines. There's a lot of things that have been linked to misophonia: anxiety, depression, ADHD, autism, tinnitus, hyperacusis, and so on. The list goes on. So what I'd like to do is to try, I'm not going to look at each one of these in turns, but try to understand what the underlying, I suppose, mechanism is. Why is misophonia linked to all these other things? And how can we understand misophonia by looking at these particular patterns? So the traditional approach to explaining comorbidities is, well, basically, traditional approaches struggle to explain because traditional diagnostic categories in medicine, psychiatry, neurology, they want things to be separate. So misophonia is a separate thing, autism is a separate thing. But if you go about defining the world like that, then comorbidities shouldn't exist. If you want to define things as separate, then they shouldn't be co-occurring. So this is why I pose this as a scientific challenge. It challenges this orthodox view. So how do you deal with that? Well, you deal with it by forcing them to be separate. You try and make your diagnostic criteria to force things apart. Or you do other strange things, like you say, well, this is the real main thing that they've got, and this is subordinate to that. So you might want to go down this route of saying, well, if somebody's autistic, they can't be misophonic too. You're trying to force things to be separate that aren't traditionally separate. And this approach has its problems. Modern approaches kind of understand that actually the edges between these categories are somewhat woolly. And the reason it can do this is that we imagine these diagnostic categories, so autism, anxiety, misophonia, as being a constellation of different features. These different features might be different symptoms. So maybe there are 5 or 6 symptoms that belong in autism and maybe several symptoms that belong in misophonia. And you can imagine them all almost as like Venn diagrams where things are related. And some of these symptoms might be common to various conditions. So maybe there's something that predisposes people to misophonia that also predisposes people to autism. So if you've got that one common seed, it's going to develop into multiple branches in different kind of traditional conditions. And this is what I'll try to explain in terms of what I call network approaches. So let's take a step back and just try to kind of explain this visually. So this might be a traditional approach to understanding anxiety. Anxiety is this one thing, it's separate from all other things, and you either have it or you don't have it. Okay. Now, there are some good reasons why you might want to do this. So if you're developing treatment methods, you're going to have to make a binary categorical judgment about whether somebody's got anxiety. So there are places for this kind of approach. A more nuanced way of thinking about it is to say, actually, let's move away from this thing called anxiety and look at the underlying symptoms. So maybe people who are anxious are very aware of their bodily symptoms, their heart racing. Maybe they're prone to negative moods. Maybe they struggle to regulate their moods or have repetitive thoughts or think the worst things. So what we could imagine is that anxiety is these kinds of traits all feeding off each other. But of course, each of these traits are not unique to anxiety. Everybody varies in their ability to regulate emotions. Everybody varies in their ability to catastrophize. And so these are not unique to anxiety. These are common in the general population. And maybe it becomes more complex than this. Maybe you've got other kinds of symptoms, such as distorted body image or controlling your diet. And of course, when you're doing this, you could actually think, well, yeah, if these sets of things are anxiety, maybe these sets of things are eating disorders. And actually, they're kind of overlapping. And maybe there are some symptoms that are common to them both. This is made up data, by the way. It's just to illustrate the point that we can start to think about complex conditions as being broken down into certain features. And actually, where one thing ends and another one begins becomes a matter of judgment. We could say, actually, these things cluster together because there's lots of lines between them. And these things belong together because there's lots of lines between them. But ultimately, everything is connected with everything. So the advantage of thinking about disorders, conditions like this is that it becomes a data-driven approach. We can measure all of these things and just see how they're related, rather than a clinician sitting down with their notebooks and trying to figure all this out for themselves. It kind of throws away the traditional diagnostic categories, but kind of doesn't, because you could see, for example, how this constellation of features might constitute anorexia or an eating disorder. You can do other things with this as well. So you can try to figure out which symptoms are central and which ones are peripheral. So if we look at these anxiety bubbles here, we can see that emotion regulation has 4 lines to other symptoms. So it's more central, whereas repetitive thoughts has only 2 lines. So this is more central, this is more peripheral. Again, this is made up data. And this is just based on standard correlation matrices for those who are a bit more mathematically minded, but you do stuff with them to try and to figure out what is directly relating to what. Okay, so this is the background. Where's the data? So this is a large study that had over 400 participants, and we gave them a wide set of measures. But the measures consist of 3 kinds of things. One is that we measured misophonia, and we use our own scale for this, which is a questionnaire. It correlates very highly with other questionnaires that are in the literature, so we are measuring the same things as other people. One advantage of our questionnaire is that it has separate subscales. So rather like this network approach, we can try to see which facets of misophonia are related to what. So the subscales are things like avoiding social situations, intolerance of certain sounds, and so on. Then we've got 2 other sets of measures relating to clinical characteristics, anxiety, autism, and so on, and a set of measures relating to sensory sensitivity. So let's just dig a little bit deeper on these measures. So these were all questionnaires in this particular batch. So we've got questionnaires related to anxiety. But again, we don't just treat anxiety as one thing. We try and break it down into different symptoms. So social anxiety, these would be more bodily symptoms of anxiety. Cognitive symptoms of anxiety might be things like worry. Autism, again, we have got a questionnaire, but we break this down into different aspects of autism. So problems in socialization and communicating with others and imagination. Attention to detail is actually an ability in autism, not a deficit. Obsessive compulsive behaviors, again, rather than treating it as one thing, we treat it as multiple separate symptoms, and you can see them here. And we look at various migraine headache categories. So here is some of the data from the clinical measures, just looking at the mean scores. So we've got 3 different groups here. So this is breaking the misophonics into those who are really severe and those who are moderately severe. So green is very severe, blue is moderately severe, and grey is no misophonia. And essentially, we can see that misophonics are more likely to score higher on autism, more likely to score higher on anxiety, and more likely to score higher on obsessive compulsive traits. This is averaging over the different symptoms, the different subscales of these measures. You can also see that those who have more severe misophonia have more severe clinical comorbidities. So being severe in misophonia goes hand in hand with being severe or more likely to have these extra things. The bottom graphs are looking at migraine, which hasn't really been reported in the literature. This is headache-free. This is other types of headache. The key results really are that, so this is migraine without aura, and this is migraine with aura. And this is the thing that really distinguishes those with misophonia. So aura are things like visual disturbances, or maybe other symptoms like bodily disturbances, occasionally sound. But again, this is interesting. So people who have severe misophonia, so misophonia being primarily defined by sound, are having strong visual migraines. So it suggests that misophonia almost becomes morphed with other things, particularly as you push up the severity scale. The other set of measures that I talked about relate to sensory sensitivity. There are various ways of doing this. One is using questionnaire measures. So one is looking at sensors such as touch, taste, hearings included. Interoception is about sensing your body. So whether you feel your heart beating and whether you trust your heartbeat as being a reliable signal, whether you get distracted by your body, and so on. And then there's a test in which we show people patterns that some people find visually uncomfortable. And I will show you that. Okay, here it is. So again, you can vary the stripes, have them thin or thick. And some people will start to get shimmer or distortions for this. So we just ask people to rate their discomfort for these particular visual stimuli. So this is our questionnaire measure called the Glasgow Sensory Questionnaire, and it looks at hypersensitivity and hyposensitivity. So hypersensitivity is finding things particularly intense or aversive, and that is the one that really comes out. So the kinds of questions we've got here are, do you find it difficult to go into strong smelling shops? Do you dislike having a haircut because the little bits of hair are too tickly? Do you feel dizzy or peculiar if you reach up high or bend down low for something? So again, none of these questions are asking about misophonia. These are questions about general sensory sensitivity. And we find that misophonics are more sensitive, including moderate misophonics, but particularly severe misophonics. Again, we see this gradation for hypersensory sensitivity for these questions. And for these particular patterns here, the ones, let me describe what's on this axis here. The low spatial frequency are stripes that most people don't find uncomfortable. And these ones here are what are called mid to high sensory spatial frequency. People find these aversive. So everybody finds these are more aversive than the other stripes, and people with severe misophonia find them even more aversive. They report strong visual intensity, so shimmering shapes, and also bodily sensations, hairs on end, and so on, is characterizing severe misophonia. So essentially what we've got is a constellation of other symptoms that go hand in hand with misophonia, some of which are clinically relevant, such as anxiety and autism, and some are related to sensory sensitivity, which is a symptom that is common to many conditions in the literature. And here it comes. So here is our attempt to put all of these different things together in some kind of model. So let me take a while explaining what we've got here. So the different colours represent our different kinds of measures. So here we've got our 5 different scales measuring misophonia in, what is this, turquoise green. In yellow, we've got our measures looking at obsessive compulsive symptoms. In red, we've got our measures looking at autism. Now, the fact that things kind of fall together in the network means that things kind of belong together, that these things hold together quite well. And that's a good sign. It means that our measures are measuring the right kind of thing. So our measures of misophonia belong together. If these were completely separate in the diagram, it would suggest that misophonia was so broad, it was almost kind of meaningless. So these things are tightly related to each other. They kind of form a bit of a network within a network, in the same way as I showed you with the example from anxiety and eating disorders before. And most of the scales do this. If you look at autism, again, these provide a little bit of a clustering of the main autism symptoms, apart from one which pulls away. And this is attention to detail. So attention to detail is noticing things that other people miss, and it doesn't kind of belong with the other autism symptoms in our model. It actually belongs with obsessive compulsive symptoms like hoarding and ordering things. These ones here are our measures of sensory sensitivity. So this is our questionnaire measure of sensory sensitivity here, asking about smells and was it having your hair cut? And these are our response to the stripy visual patterns here. What you can see is that this forms a central part of the network. What that means is that, in effect, that the thing that links together misophonia here with autism is that they are both shared. This symptom of sensory sensitivity goes with both misophonia and it goes with autism. So it's almost like the Venn diagrams that I drew at the beginning, is that sensory sensitivity kind of belongs with misophonia and it kind of belongs with autism. So when you get high sensory sensitivity, there's a chance you're going to develop both of these things as your comorbidities. So in effect, misophonia belongs with autism because it shares this symptom in common. But actually, you've got the same perhaps going with anxiety. So these are the 3 symptoms of anxiety here that again belong together. They're tightly coupled. But actually, to get from misophonia to anxiety, you've got to go via sensory sensitivity. And similarly for the other ones there. And again, you can see that obsessive compulsive symptoms like obsessing belong with anxiety, whereas ordering belongs more with the sensory aspects of this. So you get things that make sense fall out of this here. We could try to quantify this as well. So I said that this measure of sensory sensitivity, the GSQ, this questionnaire, is central. It kind of falls out of the diagram, but you can actually look at this mathematically. So what this measure here is that it's kind of looking, if you take 2 points in the network and you try and join them together, do you have to go via that particular symptom to get there? The analogy to this is that imagine that I pick 2 cities in England and I want to travel by train. The chances are you're going to have to travel via London because the rail network in the UK is very centralised, and to get from any city to the other, there's a good chance you'll go via London. So in effect, sensory sensitivity is to the network of clinical symptoms of misophonia what London is to the rail network of the UK. That's the best way in which I can describe what this result is saying. So sensory sensitivity before was looking at other senses aside from hearing. But what about sensory sensitivity in sounds? So one of the other comorbidities with misophonia is something called hyperacusis, which is typically defined by audiologists and would be described as an abnormally disproportionate increase in the sensation of loudness in response to auditory stimuli of normal volume. There are various ways in which you can measure this. One is what's called the uncomfortable loudness levels. What you do is you place sounds of different frequencies into either the left ear or the right ear, And the sounds get louder and louder over time. Don't worry, I'm not going to play a sound. And at some point, you're just asked to raise your hand when the sounds become uncomfortable. It's not an endurance test. It's just what is the first point at which this sound becomes uncomfortable. That's all it is. What we've got here are 30 people without misophonia and 30 people with misophonia. And this is just the average loudness at which people raise their hands. So higher on the scale means that you raise your hands on average at, say, 90 decibels. And here you've got people raising their hands on average at 70 decibels on that. And you can see that there's a continuous distribution of scores. You can impose a cutoff on this. So one cutoff is that if you raise your hands to sounds of 77 decibels or less, then this might qualify for hyperacusis. Again, you might need a more formal diagnosis from an audiologist, but this is one way of looking at it. And you can see that around twice as many misophonics as controls are meeting that particular threshold. But actually, instead of thinking of hyperacusis as something that you either have or you don't have as a traditional diagnostic category, we can treat this as a measure of auditory sensory sensitivity and just look at this as a continuous distribution. Sorry, I'm just going to click again. And what you notice here is that the whole distribution is shifted down. So actually, the interesting participants are not necessarily the people at the low end who are at the hyperacusis end. If we look at the top end, in our control group, we had 5 participants who literally never raised their hands once. So they got to 90 decibels for all 12 sounds, never raising their hands, and we just coded this as 95 decibels. We didn't find a single misophonic participant who was willing to go up to that particular level. So even though these people here have good sound tolerance, they're still arguably not where you expect them to be, because we might expect 5 of these people to be up here, and that isn't the case. It's almost as if everybody in the misophonic group has been shifted down, and this just forces some people into this diagnostic category of hyperacusis. But actually everybody within the misophonia sample is behaving in a sound-sensitive way, including those at the top end. And these are not misophonic sounds. These are just pure tones that an audiologist would use to assess hearing. So let's sum up where we are here. So sensory sensitivity, finding stimuli, sensory stimuli unusually intense or aversive, is a key feature of misophonia. It is found for sounds, including some sounds which aren't part of the normal misophonic repertoire in that word cloud I presented at the beginning. But it also extends to vision and other senses. We see it in vision in terms of proneness to migraine, visual aspects of migraine, and we see it in questionnaire measures. Sensory sensitivity is not a unique feature of misophonia. It's what we might call a transdiagnostic symptom. We find it in anxiety, we find it in autism. And this might explain why misophonia is not an isolated thing. It's part of a cluster of other symptoms that appear to a greater or lesser extent. So we can think of this as being something of a bridge that links misophonia to potential other problems. What are the wider implications for misophonia of our research? One of the things that interests me is that severity and complexity go hand in hand. So people who have more severe misophonia are far more likely to have other things outside of their misophonia. They have a broad profile of comorbidities. What this means in terms of other researchers is that we shouldn't just look at misophonia. We shouldn't fall into the trap that I set at the beginning of thinking that misophonia, you either have it or you don't. We can think of it as something that is continuous, and there might be some point at which you say, actually, this group of people need treatment and this group of people don't. But we can think of some people having misophonia, and then a second threshold, which some people have misophonia, and this is a problem that requires clinical intervention. So we can think of it as a severity gradient. We don't necessarily have to redefine misophonia by finding all these other things. Just because misophonia is associated with anxiety and sensory sensitivity and some autistic symptoms doesn't mean that we have to throw away our initial definition of misophonia. It just means that we have to understand that individuals with misophonia have a complex profile. Finally, although I've kind of argued positively that sensory sensitivity is a key part of the explanation, I don't think it's going to be a sole explanation. For example, I'm at a loss to explain why misophonics dislike eating, or the sound of eating, whereas autistic people stereotypically dislike the sounds of clapping. Both of these groups have high sensory sensitivity on the kinds of measures we give them, but actually in daily life they seem to gravitate around different stimuli. So there is a lot more work to be done. That's how these broad generic dispositions translate into the day-to-day symptoms that are driving people mad in their daily lives. And on that note, by all means, get in touch. I haven't put my email there, but you can find me. This is our website for Misophonia. We call it Misophonia Hub. I'd like to thank our funders and my colleagues at the University of Sussex.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Ward. I am so interested in everything you just presented personally. I am going to just pop up onto the share screen a kind of placeholder slide here for us as we transition to the Q&A portion. Dr. Brout, would you like to take the lead here?
Thank you. So one of the first